you done this before?
Well, it's not my place at all.
Well, don't dismiss it so quickly. Maybe I'm at stake.
Actually, when I was a station media bitch, I did it once. And if the idiots in Munich finally knew where the zeitgeist is heading, they would have long since released a decent E-Mini Cabrio.
What do you think of new design minis? Have you seen it?
By now, every time I see it, I like it a little bit more. To my knowledge, there has never been a discussion at BrandTrust about this decision since then. Not from anyone anymore. I think people were relieved.
Not with you?
Or not with me. Could also be the case. Dear viewers, welcome. New episode of BrandTrust Live with my colleague Shalina Schlechter and myself. And we have chosen, we believe, a current topic for today. Of course, based on the observations of the past weeks. Keyword, the inauguration of the new American president. And what that has entailed. I mean, we could talk about these consequences for a week. However, in this context, we have focused on a small area, specifically the phenomenon of the kowtow. In particular, by the American media, is what we have focused on. I think one can now say, before the new presidency, keyword Mark Zuckerberg's Meta, Jeff Bezos, Washington Post, and of course, Elon Musk with everything. And once again, the question arose for us, how much political stance does a brand need? Shalina, does it need it at all? Can brands save themselves a neutral territory and say we are apolitical?
That's another very simple question to start with.
We try to start gently.
I always dream, as you know, that they are allowed to be apolitical because I find it nice if there is any area in life that is not politicized. But I believe you can no longer quite afford it. Could you afford it in the past? Were earlier brands more apolitical?
I'm the expert here for the past.
Yes.
As far back as my past goes. No, because you see, I gradually drifted into such a generation, not born into it because I was younger then. The 68 generation, from which a lot emerged, including the green ideology, under which we, to make a statement here, suffer nowadays. And back then, I believe, at least in my perception, it began, both negatively, misspuntive, and positively. I mean, one must not forget one of the most coveted brands in the world, Apple, emerged from a 68 attitude. One must not forget, with a strong revolutionary character. Back then, there were only mainframe computers for large industries and governments. And the Homebrew Club in Silicon Valley set out to say, no, we must also make personal computers available to people. And there were Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, the two Steves who founded Apple, leading the way. So in that respect, has a political, let's call it energy. In this case, counter energy brands, left liberal brands like Apple, for example, have been brought about, and left liberal in connection with the most valuable stock market company in the world is indeed an interesting combination.
So my thesis to this original question would have been that perhaps in the past, brands could more easily afford not to take a political stance, but now they increasingly have to. And now comes my sociocultural derivation. Namely, do we buy or do we steer through our consumption much more nowadays? Our identity image. So we buy to express and position ourselves. I also asked myself, when was the last time you bought something not to express your identity, but just because you needed it? So functional purchase by governments.
I think there's hardly any of that anymore. So everything has meaning. That's what we're working on too. Every purchase should have a meaning. And that also means sharpening status, changing status, confirming status. And I think it doesn't matter at all whether you get a coffee in a paper cup or a recycled cup. It already starts there. It's already a statement. Whether you still drink coffee at all is also a statement. And whether it's fair trade is a statement. Whether you add milk, which milk. There's a cafe in Zurich where I really enjoy drinking coffee. Now I have to experience that there's no more cow's milk because they don't even ask anymore. There's simply no cow's milk. It's a statement and also has a political component. So I think everyone really, almost every purchase, and the more educated you are, the more it's a statement purchase. You show your stance with it.
Exactly. And I think that was different in the past. Now I define the past differently or less strongly. I believe this has increased because we are even more in this society of abundance. So I think that this trend has grown, and accordingly also the expectations. I vote with my wallet. With this purchase, I also represent a stance. And that's why I believe you expect more and more from brands, that they are something you can identify with 360 degrees.
I agree with you. And I think there's also a much simpler reason. In the past, before social media, there was no networking as a company. You weren't so transparent. So that means we made purchases without knowing where it actually came from, let alone where it was produced or who produced it, and whether it was done well or poorly, whether it harmed the environment and people. That was completely non-transparent in the past. We didn't know that. First point. Second point, in the past, only companies and politics acted as broadcasters. So companies through advertising, politics through media. We, consumers, did not broadcast. We couldn't broadcast. We only received. And now we can all broadcast. And sometimes with greater reach than companies. I mean, some social media influencers have reach in the tens of millions, while companies have 4-digit numbers. So a lot has changed massively in that we can also broadcast and do so, expressing our opinions. And companies also have to broadcast. Many still see it as a necessity. I have to be on TikTok now, not me. New opportunity. And as a result, things become much more transparent, and we naturally confront that. And we then say, okay, how does the one I buy from do it? Is he also against child labor, or does he not care? Yes. But there's still a long way to go. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a Kick or an NKD and all those.
It became very noticeable to me last year and the year before, especially during the Black Lives Matter movement. And then I thought to myself, if I were in their position now, how would I actually decide? Do I now post a black photo on Instagram to show my solidarity as an institution, a company? You also don't know how do all your buyers feel about it. Not at all. In case of doubt, it's only those who support it that are particularly loud. And you notice them, but you don't know at all. How do they react to your positioning there?
The question is, we are in the business of seduction. And if you want to seduce someone, if you ask yourself every time how they will react, I think it doesn't lead to seduction. So you also need a bit of risk appetite. And since today I'm an expert on the past, there was once a campaign, you should remember, by Benetton. This famous campaign by Oliviero Toscani, who recently passed away. This photographer, who was then the creative director of Benetton, this United Colors of Benetton. Yes, we know them. He was the first to consciously do exactly that. He showed people of different ethnicities. He showed a priest kissing a nun. He showed 2 women kissing. And back then, of course, A, he sent it into a vacuum because feedback was difficult. There were no channels. So it was a risk. And B, he obviously had his client, the owner of Benetton. Only a family business could do that. They truly took a risk there. They even showed bloody, torn clothes from the Kosovo War as a clothing retailer. Crazy. Really, I think to this day, it's still the dream of every creative person to be able to do something like that once in their life. But from today's perspective, I think it's particularly remarkable. It was a completely political statement. So they anticipated everything, diversity, LGBT, everything. Discredited churches. Really everyone. They had, I think, the image with a pregnant woman. They did something with that too, which again violated such a thing, especially as an Italian company, Vatican, Pope, and so on. And from today's perspective, I find it all the more remarkable what the 2 Benetton and Toscani conveyed back then. And that was without social media, without them wanting to ingratiate themselves. Instead, they did their own thing, and it increasingly took on a life of its own. And when the 2 were no longer in charge, the topic was dead again. Today, Benetton is once again a boring brand like all the others, without stance, without statement, without distinctiveness. And that was the absolute highlight in the life of this company back then.
So Netflix or HBO?
Oh, I'm a bit of a 90s person. HBO. Okay.
Heat pump or oil heating?
Heat pump, please.
Wrapped organic cucumber or regional unwrapped cucumber?
Regional, unwrapped.
Hoarding or starving? I
Tried hoarding once, then I threw everything away a year later.
Yeah, that's silly then. That is just silly.
Since then, that's it.
We might need to highlight that now. I still have to ask this. Mao, Zedong or Stalin?
You're asking me to choose between two evils.
We can list a few more, then it gets funnier. Brand or Sean?
Oh, that's like Mao Zedong or Stalin? I can't answer that either. No, both are terrible.
Open or covert lobbying?
Open.
WhatsApp or social?
The networking effect, social loss there, WhatsApp.
Old Mini or E-Mini?
E-Mini, and as a convertible. And if the idiots in Munich would finally realize where the zeitgeist is heading, they would have long since released a decent E-Mini convertible.
How do you find new design, new Minis? Have you seen them yet?
By now, every time I see them, I find them a little bit better. But I was shocked. I'm similar in that regard. Emphasized.
So far, I really enjoy offering you.
I already know. It also has to cater to classic car drivers.
Joy of the vibrant and youthful young queen or queen and her reign. National or supranational entities, supra. Last year, during Pride Month, BMW changed its logo to rainbow colors during this month, but only in European countries and not in the Middle East. And for that, they were criticized for not following through. They founded a Pride network, speakers, and I believe they also equipped the Pride parade in Munich with BMW cars that were painted accordingly. I found that totally ridiculous, I must say.
You can't say that now. In your generation as young women, you really need to know this well.
Not because of this Pride topic, but I found it ridiculous from the brand BMW because I didn't buy it from them. And now I come to this proactive, reactive. To me personally, it seemed like we want to join in now because somehow we can't avoid it. And we also want to offer ourselves to the younger generations or other target groups. But we don't really mean it seriously because we prefer to please everyone. That's why we don't do it in the Middle East either. And for me, that's the opposite of expressed will or leading, as you say. Leading fairly in advance, but just pandering.
Well, I mean, you also know a few highly potent sales directors from markets, regions, countries. And I tell you 100%, and that's exactly the problem. I believe the Lebanese sales director importer, he went up in arms in Munich, and he immediately took his Egyptian and Israeli counterparts with him. Then they were all brothers and really put pressure on the sales executives. And I believe you can see exactly from this story, this opportunism for brands regarding these trends, whether it's in the woke direction or now in the opposite, as with Trump here, it never does any good. For reasons of credibility, it just looks ridiculous to everyone. And it seems, which I find much worse than making oneself ridiculous, is pandering. And brands don't do that. Brands should never pander. And I believe that's the core problem. In that sense, the question for me isn't whether you should be proactive or reactive. Rather, you should be true to yourself. I think that's the crucial point. As a brand, you need to develop an awareness of what you stand for, completely independent of the trend. And that's what it's about. It's naturally very difficult because you have to immerse yourself again in the internal world of a company. There's a CEO who has a stance, who has his opinion, and then his press people come along in Tat's collaboration with media inquiries. And then, of course, they start to pick apart this stance. I'll defend the CEOs for a moment and assume they have their own stance, although that's not always the case, as we know. But many do have it, and then they get softened up by the PR people systematically. And eventually they become woke, even though they fundamentally aren't, and they get laughed at by their own children. And That's what we mentioned earlier. This enormous pressure that is built up by this extreme speed of communication density, everyone being a broadcaster. And we've noticed this very clearly in the last few years, the last 4 or 5 years, what is being attempted to be done with us. I mean, we had the same problem at BrandTrust with gender issues. We have an incredible amount of exposure with many companies. We also experienced everything that was happening there. We were also forced into it in a certain way. Naturally, the discussion also arose with us, and we discussed it and eventually decided we won't use gender-neutral language. We are polite and simply refer to viewers. And viewers and nothing else. We do not join this exaggeration that marks the beginning of change. I believe, and that's how we justified it, that it also fits with the Trump brand, because as a strategy consultant, you must stand beside the battle. Not in the battle, otherwise you lose your function. You stand beside the battle on your own hill and observe what the commanders are doing, how things are going down there, and where you can be useful to your commander. And we have now essentially applied this to our stance on the topic of gendering, and therefore also said we are not entering this battle. It will be over at some point anyway, because it was a bridge, and I believe it is now over as well. Now comes the counter trend, then another trend will follow, and eventually it will settle at a higher level of development. And as a strategy consultant, you should not enter the battle. To my knowledge, since that decision, there has never been a discussion about it at BrandTrust from anyone. I think people were relieved.
Not with you.
Or not with me. That could also be the case. I also love my own reality. Politics or economy?
Economy?
Are you political or apolitical?
I am definitely political.
Vote or not vote? Sympathy or election program? Be honest?
Yes.
We are honest?
Yes. I think it's sympathy by now.
Left or right?
No answer.
Follow or lead? Minority or majority?
Oh, Klaus. Life could be so simple. Yeah, come on. Let's go with attitude and majority.
Indeed. Status purchase or functional purchase?
Status?
Loyal voter or swing voter?
Swing voter?
Ideology or pragmatism?
Ideology, otherwise it gets too boring. I think what is often forgotten or missed in this battle, perhaps also as a relief for the CEOs you mentioned, is the silent masses or the people who don't feel any dissent with the current state and therefore do not articulate themselves. And with that, I don't mean to say ignore the minorities, but of course one must look at what is happening in the social construct around me. In which society do I actually want to create value with my brand? But always weighing, especially when press inquiries come in to say, yes, who are we actually there for? And whoa, who does this message also reach? So if I now position myself as BMW at the Christopher Street Day, and I'm not saying they shouldn't do it then. The question is also, how do all my other customers perceive it? How do my other employees perceive it? What does it do to them that we are now advocating so strongly for this target group?
So supporting what you said with numbers, there is a principle of effect, which I believe everyone in social media knows. It's called 199. It defines the interaction rate, meaning 1%, is constantly sending. They sit there, comment, like, and create posts. 9% react to it by liking or sharing it. And 90% do nothing. They consume. And that's exactly this ratio. That means the 1% determine the discourse.
What we haven't really talked about was actually your cliffhanger, or why you didn't really get upset about Meta's kowtow and so on. How do we evaluate that now?
I was affected. That's why I didn't get upset, because I still had too much to process. What it actually means and what it does and what it signifies. Democracy has 3 pillars. And in every little dictator's handbook, it says what you need to do to undermine them. So the three pillars of democracy are free elections. It's the separation of powers, especially the judiciary, and it's free media. And every dictator knows the first thing he does is align the media. Then he subjugates the judiciary to get everyone under control. And in the end, he discredits the opposition. And with that, elections are over. That's exactly what's happening in America right now. In this respect, the first thing was to subjugate the media. And those are simply no longer the New York Times. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. X and all, like the heinies, are called, and now, of course, one can complain about the spinelessness of a Zuckerberg, etc. If one is benevolent, it can also be called pragmatism, but it must always be viewed against the American backdrop. That's why we talk about the sociocultural differences. And there we often see ourselves as the moral cultural mentors we feel in Europe, which God knows is not our place. And in America, people are simply much, much more pragmatic. And that's why I didn't get upset. Because I really thought about whether this is good or bad. From the perspective of dictators, it's naturally good. And from a freedom-loving democracy, it's naturally bad at first glance. But the solution will lie neither here nor there. It's somewhere in between. Sure, I can now. And if something works in Germany, it's the outrage machine. It always works. And as a strategy consultant, I try to maintain a conscious distance and say, okay, let's not get upset now. Otherwise, we consider whether it might also have an advantage.
I also find that exciting. So firstly, an exciting principle, use the difficulty. What can we make of it now? The best question always is, how can we use this for ourselves? Regarding this whole topic of America, I often think, can I even judge this anymore from afar with the distance? Because what has almost bothered me a little lately is that we collectively always, or many Americans have been denied common sense. Yeah, the idiots that they vote for Trump and what they're doing there. And then I think to myself, yeah, and now I know better. So I also have selective reporting and also this rule book. That's all part of it. Smart people, I mean, they're not idiots. And if they all find it so great now, sure, a few reasons are obvious. I always think to myself, I'm not even daring to give an opinion, but rather I just watch and see what happens. We've already said in our last broadcast that it's a highly political year, and I think it just remains incredibly exciting.
That's how everyone should do it, because if we return to the core theme of the show, brands need a political stance, as we have now, I believe, worked out. In the USA, it's not possible otherwise because the system is different, because it's much more intertwined, much more boundless. Here we have these boundaries, these boxes. That's why the question mainly arises here. I believe in America, such a topic wouldn't even become big in the public eye. And I think, yes, you can. You can, due to this development in social media, everyone becomes a broadcaster, constant feedback and so on. You cannot refuse a political stance as a brand because, as you said at the beginning, every purchase is also a purchase of significance. Be it in the ESG field, meaning sustainable and organic, and treating everyone well, including the employees. And Lidl, having monitored its employees, of course, felt this immediately. And I think that's right too. And, of course, we are also working on it. We are convinced that a purchase also has something to do with responsibility. You decide which system wins through your purchase or through your membership, through your subscription. And that's why you have to think about it. And I believe that's why we need to educate. And that's why transparency is good. And that's why there should be no brands that haven't considered these thoughts. And those that, if possible, act smarter, like in the example of BMW, which have acted populistically, opportunistically. What, for a brand, I say it again to everyone. BMW managers, what is forbidden you must not do. You must know a value system and act consistently within this value system, and also respond to such challenges and trends, etc., address them. And there are, dear press people, many stylistic devices where you can do that. That includes irony. That includes sarcasm. You can do all of that. And by doing so, you strengthen your own position and do not become a pawn, not a victim, and not an opportunist. Okay?
Rage baiting. Rage baiting.
Rage baiting for all podcasts.
So, angry baiting or what?
Perfect. Don't you know the term, but perfectly translated, right? That fits exactly into this topic, though, of people who use social media to brutally throw something out there to provoke reactions from everyone.
Have you ever done that?
Me, well, it's not my place at all.
Now, don't dismiss it so quickly. Maybe I'm in such a game.
Yes, when I was a self-media bitch, I did it once. Me, too. I once had an experience with Eurowings, and I posted about it. Those were my 3 learnings. And I really dissed Eurowings because they messed up. And I got 750,000 views. And I learned 2 things from that. First, how rage baiting works. You have to be an extreme populist. That's also disgusting, to be honest. And second, what it does to you when you get 750,000 views. I don't know. I was sitting in a bar in Cologne, and then I had 50. By the end, I had 100. Then I went home, and I had 200. And then it kept going like that. I didn't even know what was happening. So you have a serotonin release that really hits you, and then it's enough. I didn't want that anymore. That's why I can understand if you rely on it, on your business model, your political existence, and so on. And then when you don't have it anymore, it's like going cold turkey. I learned a lot from that, but that was, well, a bit intentional. I wanted to criticize Eurowings, of course, and got into apparently these aviation topics. They seem to work really well, but I didn't even expand on it further because, as I said, I didn't want to give in to this dependency.
I think I've never rage baited. Only here on Live, maybe I got a bit upset there.
No, not really. We could have heard it completely differently or thrown it out if we wanted to.
Let's get a bit upset about the FDP.
With Trump, and you can do the same with others, or with Elon Musk, who makes a bold statement and says, we're buying Greenland now, and thus steers an entire discussion. By the way, on the topic of serendipity, the Greenlanders think it's great now. They say they've never had so much attention, and they want to strengthen their economy and attract tourism. And thank you, Trump, so much. For the topic of our other show on the subject of embracing chance, and that's what the Greenlanders are doing right now to break away from the Danes, whom they really don't like. Well, they don't want to become Americans either, but a bit of association and so on, they can imagine.
They're sliding for themselves.
That's a difficulty. Someone once baited, and then comes Santa Petty.
But it's, as you say, a super cool distraction maneuver. This principle, I give them something to talk about, and then I can quickly tackle other things on the right. To get upset, exactly, to get upset. That's also media effective. Then the front pages are full, the headlines are already pre-programmed, and then I can push through a comparatively smaller issue on the right.
I would apply with this tactic to the Municipal Council of Linkries.
I think you'd really enjoy that now.
You wish to go? My goal.
That's my goal.
Okay. Now we've clarified the connection between rage baiting and serendipity. And I hope we were able to inspire, give a little direction, perhaps confirm or present new perspectives. That's why we do this show. We're glad you were with us, listened and watched. And if you want to see it more often, there's the option to subscribe. I don't exactly know how it works, but most people do. And I'm looking forward to our next topic next time. Bye. BrandTrust Life. The first cut. Now, I think I wanted to say the Kochhaus, but I'm not sure if that's the plural of Kochau. Kochhaus is Kochhausen. Kochhausen